So, hey guys, you just heard a part of the original Terminator theme song from the 1980s, and that is because for today's movie review, I'm going to be reviewing Terminator Genisys, the fifth installment and the latest installment in the Terminator franchise. Terminator Genisys is directed by Alan Taylor, who's known for directing Thor the Dark World, as well as episodes for Game of Thrones on TV. In Terminator Genisys, the fifth installment in the series, this time around, John Connor and his team or army or whatever you want to call them. They're kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel for the war. It's slowly coming to an end. The war against Skynet is very much on the side of humans now. Um, so everything's going according to plan. And basically, what we're looking at is what's leading up to what's going to be the first Terminator film, in the sense that, for those who saw the first Terminator and for those who didn't, I'm going to try to give you the best non-spoiler way to say all this without obviously ruining Terminator Genisys or ruining the original Terminator for those who haven't even seen that movie. So basically, they get to a point where Kyle Reese has to now go back in time, which will basically be the events of the first Terminator film. And like I said, what we're looking at is basically the setup to let that happen, so that way that first Terminator film can happen. That way the fans kind of know where we're at on the timeline for the Terminator franchise. So what we're really looking at here is the things that led up to that first Terminator movie. So Kyle Reese goes back in time. What we think we're looking at is basically the beginning of the first Terminator film, with Kyle Reese getting there, with a Terminator getting there. But things don't go well. Things do not go as planned. Kyle Reese was definitely given a much different mission than what John Connor told him to do before going back in time. A different Terminator is now after Kyle Reese. Like I said, nothing is really according to plan. The mission is not what Kyle Reese was told. And so when he gets there and tracks down Sarah Connor, as well as an Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator, the one that he thought he was meant to go back and kill, and obviously this Terminator is on his side, which is definitely a twist for this first film, or the story of the first film, I should say. Kyle Reese is actually trying to figure out what his new mission is. So through a series of events, not only does Kyle Reese, Sarah Connor, and an Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator have to stop a new evil Terminator, they also have to figure out something that's going against, the space-time continuum, a new time travel gap. And this is something that's happening with Skynet, with both the past and the future, that could both ruin the future and ruin the past if Skynet does win with their new reassigned plan. That also Kyle Reese and John Connor and Sarah Connor and even the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator are also trying to figure out what exactly is going on, while the old mission should have been going on. So it's basically a whole bunch of space-time continuing stuff that interfered with what Kyle Reese was originally meant to do, that we all know what he did do for the first Terminator film, if that made any sense. So that's the best non-spoiler, complicated synopsis I can give you for Terminator Genisys. Overall, guys, I really didn't like this movie. There's a lot of things about this movie that really didn't work. There's a lot of things about this movie that definitely remind me why the first two Terminator films work so well, why James Cameron knows how to write and direct a really good movie that unfortunately Alan Taylor doesn't look like he could have done for this movie. So overall, for my overall thoughts of Terminator Genisys, for my positives, I did like how Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator character is definitely continued here. For those who liked what he did with Terminator 2, with learning how to blend in with people and learning how to have a personality and to have a sense of humor, that's definitely continued here. Sarah Connor in the 80s definitely tried to help the Terminator have that, just like the way John Connor did in the second Terminator film. So that's continued. For those who are hoping that Arnold Schwarzenegger was going to get that opportunity, it is continued here. So that's the good news for this movie. Another good thing about this movie is the key franchise characters, specifically the first two films, the ones that were written and directed by James Cameron. Almost all those big, important key characters do come back. So that means we do get John Connor, we do get Kyle Reese, we do get Sarah Connor, and we do get the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator. The four very important people, or I should say for the fourth one, a robot, have all come back for this story. Unfortunately, Arnold Schwarzenegger is the only one of those actors or actresses of those four characters to continue playing this role. Everybody else is recasted as someone else compared to who they were played by in earlier films. But the important thing is the characters themselves are continued. So for those who were hoping to get another Terminator story that had those big important key characters back, Terminator Genisys does have that. This film also has a lot of nostalgia with the first and second Terminator film, whether it's the dialogue or the way a scene plays out, or the way a certain character jokes about something that we all knew happened in the first or second Terminator film, or even the way that certain characters behave, specifically the villains, like how the new villainous Terminator in the 80s is very much reminiscent of, or very representative of, the second Terminator film's villain. It very much felt like that police officer villain played by Robert Patrick in that second Terminator movie. The setup for Terminator 1, I liked how they did that here. There's even a shot for shot animatronic scene in here that definitely was very much in the vein of the first Terminator film, to the point where you almost feel like James Cameron was on the set for that day to make sure that it looks exactly like what he did in the first Terminator movie. So, huge thumbs up to that. I did kind of like the recreation of that scene. It definitely felt like a revisit to the first Terminator film, very much so, until we got a lot of stuff later on that really kind of ruined that scene for me. So, now for my negatives of Terminator 5, because like I said, I really didn't care for this film too much. For my negatives, this film has a very messy, convoluted, and overcomplicated plot. As you can even tell by my synopsis earlier in this review, this is a very difficult film to explain, a difficult film to understand, a difficult film to really pinpoint what the main focus of the film is. And it's also a very difficult film to kind of say where exactly is the timeline at, as far as when the movie is done with, when the movie's going on, and when the movie begins. I understand that, this is something that's setting up for the first Terminator film, but there's a spot in the movie that I can't really reveal to you that is very much like, okay, are we in Terminator 2 now? Are we in Terminator 3 now? Are we in Terminator 4 now? Are we in a timeline somewhere that is in between one of those three movies? Is this a completely different timeline? Is this, there's so many different ways they could have done this that would have made much more sense. But unfortunately, because Alan Taylor doesn't even know how to handle his own material in the movie, the film falls flat very quickly. The film also has some very bad action scenes in it, unfortunately, specifically on scenes that is supposed to be new material, whether it's in the 80s or the 2000s or wherever the film ends up going. There's just a lot of really bad action scenes here, and unfortunately, not a lot of them work too well, and they're kind of hard to follow just because the cameraman and the crew and whoever else was involved with making these scenes really have no idea on how to stage these action scenes or how to execute them, and unfortunately they turn out to be pretty bad as a result. The film also ruins aspects of the first two films, such as, how does John Connor get there? How will John Connor protect his people? Does the events of Terminator 2 even happen now? Does the events of Terminator 3 even happen now? What happens to the events of Terminator Salvation? A lot of these questions get brought up, and by the end of the film, i.e., myself as the viewer who just experienced this film, has no idea what to tell you. It really doesn't know where on the Terminator franchise timeline this film wants to be placed at. So there's just a lot of things about this film that just kind of ruin the first two films' aspects that made those first two films by James Cameron so great. There's also a lot of forced moments here and a lot of forced romance. Because those of you know who the parents of John Connor are, there's a lot of scenes here that very much force the soon-to-be parents of John Connor, I guess, in a sense. And as a result, it feels very forced. It feels like these two characters don't really ever like each other in the movie. And when they are supposed to like each other in a way later on in the movie, it just feels very forced. Also, Jai Courtney plays Kyle Reese in the film. I believe the original actor's name was Michael Biehn or Michael Bean. Jai Courtney really did not sell me as playing Kyle Reese. I thought it was a very stale performance. I didn't even like his performance in A Good Day to Die Hard, where he played John McClane's son. He was also in Jack Reacher, I believe, as an assassin of some kind. This guy really hasn't impressed me with anything yet, and unfortunately, Terminator 5 didn't impress me again either. So I'm really getting sick of Jai Courtney being in all these big budget films because quite clearly he cannot handle these big budget roles that he seems to keep getting. So overall, I'm going to give Terminator 5 or Terminator Genisys a 5.5 out of 10. It's really not a good movie. Like I said, there's rather than Arnold Schwarzenegger returning as his famous role, the key franchise characters from the earlier films returning, the nostalgia of Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 occasionally happening for the viewers, and the setup for Terminator 1 being there. Other than that, Terminator 5 or Terminator Genisys, since that's what the director wants to seem to want to call this movie, really isn't that great of a movie. I really can't recommend it. For those who do want to see it still, I would say either see this on like a $5 Tuesday if you can, or renting it from Redbox, or let's say there's a really hardcore Terminator fan that buys this film down the road and you get the opportunity to see it that way. The less money you can spend on this, the better. I really don't think it's worth the $8 ticket admission to see it. I really don't think it's that impressive of a film. So 5.5 out of 10 for me. Thumbs down. Didn't really care for this one. Um, if they do make another Terminator film, I hope it's a lot better than this one.